All right, yeah, just a brief overview here. Real quick with the cattle here, the white-faced bull out there, he's we purchased him from Kit Farrow. He's about 15, I think he's 15% Hereford, and the rest is Black Angus. We got various ages of cows here, anything up to probably, the oldest is 14 in this herd. Is that red one here in the front? The red one in the front here is 11. And we got a couple of first calvers in here. Cross fencing, we really like one-wire electric fences. We do use steel posts. We just haven't gotten away from that, I guess. I know there was some talk about that yesterday. Shame on me. Right behind us over here, you can see where we stuck a pipe on top of a steel post to the northwest here, and that's our. It took us a while to figure this out, but that's our overhead gates. So instead of taking the cows to a gate all the time, now we just stick a pipe on top of a post, and we got a, 100-foot gate anywhere we want to put it now. It took us a little while to figure that out, and it works really well.
Do you have any trouble with the cattle going through there because they're used to hitting the wire?
Yearlings, yes. The first time the yearlings go through, it's interesting, but otherwise with the cows, they're so used to it.
Already.
Yep. Cross fencing and water points. The reason why we got these cross fence down here, this and the next site used to be a field back in the 1950s. It was seeded back to grass, and it was seeded back to what SCD thinks is Russian wild rye, and I have no reason to doubt them, but it's a bunch grass and there's a lot of bare soil, and it's a hard clay pans. There's a lot of areas where there's bare ground, and I don't know why, but the cattle would come in here and they would just annihilate those fields before they'd move out into the native prairie. So we said we'll fix them, and we fenced out the fields to make them go on the native prairie. And also with the cross fencing, that allows us to set up bale grazing spots, because we usually set them up in the fall beforehand, and we can only set up like 2 or 3 bale grazing spots. Now we have the option to set up 5 or 6 bale grazing spots going into the winter if we need to. The water tanks up here, the taller tank was one of the first ones we put in back in '06. It was only like a 500-gallon tank. Very undersized. The fence line split the tank so they can only drink out of half of the tank. It was very undersized, and as it was mentioned yesterday, overdevelop your water from the start. It just makes a world of difference. We just put the second tank in, the lower tank. We wanted it lower so the calves could drink easier. We also wanted it lower because that's going to be eventually our winterized tank. We want to build an insulated cover for it for winter grazing. And we want to be able to capture some ground heat coming up from the bottom. I may have got it in a little too low. I'm open to any comments on that. Like I said, not everything is success around here. Monday we turned the water onto that tank. Tuesday we came down here and there's a leak somewhere, and I don't know if it's by the concrete or what, but it was a huge mud hole, so we had to quick throw some scoria in here Tuesday night, and hopefully we can get across with the trailers without having to pull anybody out. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our speakers here.
What's the frame score on your bulls here, Lance? Do you remember what?
We usually buy frame 2 bulls.
Well, I'd just like to make a comment on the cattle that I've seen so far here. There's a big difference, and I'm not poking fun at the cattle we saw yesterday, other than these are a lot more adapted to this environment. He's got the leg off of them. They've got a huge gut capacity. Folks, we're in the forage business. You got to have some place to put the gut, the forage. And we talk about slab-sided calves. No, I want some gut on my calves, and even the young calves on them. They're just thick blocks. The cows have a lot of capacity to hold the grass. You can't read a newspaper underneath them. If you open up a newspaper, it's going to touch the ground. I don't like to see leg on cattle, and these cattle will winter good. If you look at your cattle in the fall, you go into your herd. If you got a thin one that's there in the fall, you need to get rid of it. It's not going to get any fatter. These cattle are going to winter well. I mean, he's got a really good condition on them. The bulls are just really meaty animals. Not a lot of leg on them. Very tight sheath. They just look like a bull. That's what you want. A lot of the bulls today, they look like cows. They don't have any masculinity. So my hats are off to the cattle. They look fantastic.
Tim, don't you think the show ring is what screwed a lot of those good cattle up?
Yeah, the comment was on the show ring, absolutely. You know, and every year is different. And, you know, I asked my sale barn guy the other day, he wrote another article, and they put out a magazine, and the title of the article was, Guys, We Got to Get Them Bigger. I'm like, what? And so I just called him up. I used to graze for the guy. He was my first custom grazing client. They own 2 sale barns. And I said, Justin, I said, how big do we got to get these cattle? Oh, he said, if you get them the size of an elephant, I'd be happy. And I'm like, really? And, you know, he's in the business of selling calves. And I said, well, you're going to put yourself out of business. Oh, what do you mean? I said, well, these poor cattlemen that are trying to raise these monster calves are all going to go out of business and not going to bring any calves to your sale barn. And there was silence on the end of the phone. And he goes, Greg, you might be right. He said, but I can't change what I'm saying. Because if I do, everybody will kill me. Because I've been telling them to get bigger, bigger, bigger. Folks, we got to go the other direction. I mean, those calves, I mean, you're not going to get docked with that calf. Everybody says, oh, you get them too small, you're going to get docked. You're not going to get docked with those calves. They're still going to grow out. They're going to make good animals.
Yeah, I wanted to ask Lance that very question. Do you feel that you're being penalized at because you're mostly selling yearlings, you keep the calves over, you're selling yearlings. Are you being penalized in the market for the type of cattle that you have?
We've been selling our cattle as all naturals for a number of years in Napoleon, and we've been, every time we're there, we're topping the market, and we always even receiving premiums for the all natural. So we're not seeing anything. They will, when they go to market, as long yearlings, they're usually around that 7 1/4, 7.5 weight. I also wanted to mention the flies are not bad. Well, it's windy today, that might have a factor, but really we don't have a lot of flies on. We've been trying to breed for that. We haven't, like I said, we haven't used insecticides for a long time, and we quit using all grain to our cattle since about 2006, 2007. We have not fed grain except for the milk cow. She gets a treat after every milking. Other than that's the only grain we feed the cows.
Sorry to interrupt. Those cattle are long enough too, you know. When you talk about small cattle, some of them you've seen, they're short, stubby things. You know, those aren't going to do anything. But these folks, they just don't have the legs.
Be careful getting your cattle too small. I had a guy that got into the shorter Angus, the low line, and I told him, I said, be careful. Folks, one of your really good cash flows on a farm, if you're being adamant about picking out cows that don't work, are the cull cows. And so when you bring a cull cow to the barn and it's a really short, low-lying cow, you're not going to get anything for it. So be careful. If you get them too small, it can hammer you. And this guy didn't listen to me. I said, you know, I wouldn't make my whole herd low-line. Well, that's what, I'm going to do grass-fed beef. Well, guess what? He couldn't get a market for it. And he was forced to bring his calves to the sale barn. They stole them. They stole them. He lost his ranch. He lost his ranch. Sad story. But so, I mean, these guys, I mean, there's going to be some meat on those calves. And so, yeah, the really, really short ones you don't want, but these are not miniature cows. Those are good. Those are good cows. So, I'm going to let Bert talk a bit.
Yeah, I'd agree. These are my kind of cows. Last night, and I don't see the fellow here, but a young man was talking to me and said that he and his wife both have day jobs and they're trying to run some cattle, and he wondered how he should be breeding those cattle and, you know, whether he should keep heifers or buy heifers. And I said, no, you don't do either one. You don't buy heifers, you buy cows. And if you can make an arrangement with somebody like these folks that can breed and calve a lot of heifers and cows and buy from them some of their excess cows and then terminal cross those cows or set them up for a grass finishing deal. But that guy could simplify his life if he could buy these kind of cows at this size, and if you're going to the conventional market, terminal cross them to high growth, high carcass bulls. If you're going to the grass-fed market, keep them just about the way they are. So you've got flexibility in them, but that guy's life is simplified where he and his wife both have day jobs. They can manage their grazing so much better because the cows can all be one herd. They can all be managed exactly alike. in life was just simple and good. And these are the kind of cows I want to do those kind of programs with. And you got two ways. You can go to the conventional market, you can go to the grass-fed market, and do it with ease. But yeah, I like these cows. Their body condition score better than what we saw yesterday. At least a body condition score better. And you know, much as we don't like to have summer pass, winter's coming pretty quick, and these cows are ready to go. And so I really like what I see in the cows.
I don't have anything to say about the cows that these guys haven't already said. I want to, since we're standing here, I want to talk about infrastructure just a little bit. How long has this water point been here, Lance?
Let's say the small tank was since 2006, but we just built this new water point this year.
Okay. You'll notice, how many pastures do you actually have coming into this water point? It looks like a bunch.
Nine.
Yeah, I'm actually not a fan of what we call a wagon wheel design, where you have the central water location and then pastures tapering down to that. It is, from a cost standpoint, you've got one tank serving a lot of acres, and we want to keep our cost per acre low. But what I've seen in a lot of these wagon wheels, and the reason I asked how long has it been here, I should also ask how long have there been 9 pastures coming here?
This is the first year.
This is the first year, okay. Well, I've seen a lot of wagon wheels, different places around the country, is in a few years' time, these points, even though the grazing period in each one is fairly short, we do get a lot of trampling, and we open up some bare ground in these points here, and that becomes a source of weed infestation. I really prefer more of what we call a block design. Yes, it takes more water, and typically very often we have 4 pastures coming to a water point like this, and then we're going to have another water point that has 4 more coming to it. We can go up to 5 or 6 and have those angles not get too tight on them. But when we get more than 6 pastures coming into a water point like this, we tend to see that overuse in the points, get some compaction, and I just see some problems there. So I'm not crazy about the design. You know, the wagon wheel, when Alan Savory and Stan Parsons first came to North America in either late 70s, early 80s, I forget exactly when it was, you know, wagon wheel design in big range settings was what they were promoting for cell grazing, for grazing cell development. And in more recent years, I've heard Alan Savory say that he regrets ever doing it. Probably was the biggest mistake that he ever made. And the people, you know, at Holistic Management International, they tend to push more of block designs now, moved away from the wagon wheel. I just wanted to make a comment on that. As far as a watering site goes, almost every water point that we put in, even if it's in the middle of the desert, we put on a raised pad now. We go ahead and, you know, it doesn't have to be huge, but we like where the surface where the tank is going to be, where the animals are standing, we want that at least 12 inches above the surrounding grade. If it's 2 foot, that's, you know, cool too. But we like the animals on the tank's on a pad, the animals standing on a flat surface when they drink. We generally put geotextile down, cover it with rock, and it just takes the maintenance away from there, because those are very durable watering points. We made the mistake, because I was young and foolish, you know, well, I'm still young and foolish, but I was really young and foolish, you know, 14 years ago when we put those sites in, and we put tanks in at grade and then put rock up to them. Well, your cows end up standing on a slant, and so every time they're moving, they're digging, and so now all of our tanks have donuts around them. This is on the pivots, and so we're watering them every 3 days, so it stays wet there, it accumulates water, and guess what we have? The one health issue that we have is foot rot. And we're in the process of taking all those tanks out and putting in tire tanks on raised pads and one of the things that I expect to happen is we'll get rid of the foot rot, which is going to cut down on cowboy time doctoring and all of those things. So it's just it's another piece of that total planning, is put those water sites in right the first time, invest a little more money in them, and you'll take away a lot of headaches down the road.
I'll make a comment. Tying right into his tire tanks, we use tire tanks as well. One of the things that we've learned is when you put that geotextile down, a cow, when they walk up to the tank, you don't need a 20-foot pad extending back from that tank. You only need it about 6 to 7 feet. So measure back from that tank where that cow drinks about 7 feet, but you need that rock deep. I like to have at least 1.5 foot, 1.5 inches clean rock on my textile. But the other thing I really would recommend doing, put a landscaping timber around the edge of that rock. Otherwise, I don't care how thick your rock is. When you run 300 head onto that 2 to 3 times a day, your rock will disappear. You put a big landscaping timber around the edge of it, it captures that rock. We've got tire tanks in for 20 years. That rock is still there. I've never hauled another load of rock, ever. But the rock can't get away because I got a great big beam all the way around that, laying on the ground, and it's staked so it can't roll. The cows have to walk up on that, but Jim's right. Boy, if you get that thing elevated, you get in the wintertime, freezing snow, whatever, and those cows can go up on a nice service and drink. That's critical. I don't like seeing my cows in mud. You're just asking for a disease.
How big a rock?
1.5 inches clean.
Oh, like railroad.
Inch and a half clean rock. That's what I use. On the beams, we're in country. We have Osage orange. We use Osage orange. They'll last 80 to 100 years. Those trees, they don't rot. I started out with railroad ties. They don't last very long. If you get a railroad tie, it's usually somebody's taking one out. Those darn things will rot. Find a tree, or you can use concrete, anything. Those parking things that you park up against, you can find some of those. Anything to keep that rock up there. It's expensive. We got to pay $280 for 16 ton of rock. I'm not going to do that every year or every 2 years. Capture the rock. Keep it up by that tank.
Yeah, I'd like to add to Jim's comment on the wagon wheel design. We did just a little bit of that, and we got to the point that sometimes we had a water point in a good place, and we'd make a little trap around it, not too big, because I want cows to go in, drink, and leave. And recharge into that tank is really, really important. I hate to have a cow go to drink and not have water there to drink. They'll wait their turn if the area that they have available to them isn't too big. They'll wait their turn. They kind of learn that through their natural pecking order. But when her turn comes and she walks up there and there is no water there, that goofs her up for 2 weeks. You don't want that to happen. So she goes there. There needs to be water there when she gets there. The other thing is, I've never liked to put more than about 4 paddocks off of the same water point. I've done as much as 6, and haven't felt like I gave up too much, but I've felt that 4 is closer to ideal for the way I like to do. I think waterline, developing your infrastructure is really key. Know where to put your high tensile fence, and be real careful how you do it. Understand that it's not cast in concrete. You can move it if you find that you've made some mistakes, and usually you will find you've made some mistakes, and you will move some high tensile fence. But the better you place it in the first time, and the better you locate your water, and I don't know how to say this, but I like to run pipelines so probably where I'm going to run a high tensile fence, frankly, and I get some water spots there, and then I can water either side the fence. And sometimes I'll actually put a tank on either side the fence, and sometimes I'll split the tank, kind of depending on the kind of terrain I'm working with, and what I think erosion possibilities might be, and that sort of thing. You just play that. I've always just played that by ear, by looking at the terrain and what I'm dealing with. And but the infrastructure development, knowing where to put some high tensile fence, and to the extent you can do it, I like the high tensile fence lines. They don't have to be perfectly parallel to each other. In a perfect world, they may be, but they don't have to be because you deal with terrain. But I like large paddocks with high tensile fence that are long and narrow, so that I can subdivide that as many times as I want, based on the number of cattle, the time of the year, the growth rates of the plants, etc. If I have a large group of herd cattle there one year, I'm going to make fairly large paddocks as I move. But I can do that with a walk-in fence, running between two high tensile fences, and you can put that fence in so quick, and then move. And that concept is not so different than what Jim has shown on his irrigated pivots. I don't know how many of you have seen his design for that, where he has concentric circles, one on the outside and one midway back, and then he divides that with polywire. Well, he's long and narrow, okay? Just happens to be circular. But I'm talking the same kind of a concept, and then you've got access to water points down along that line. And so that's just a few of the ideas that my years of experience have told me about the mistakes I've made and want to avoid.
Yeah, those long, narrow pastures, we refer to those as grazing corridors, and I like making them a 1/4 mile wide. I mean, when we're on rangeland, you make them a 1/4 mile wide because a standard electric fence reel holds a 1/4 mile of polywire. And so if you had a 2-section pasture, we would have 3 fences splitting that. You know, the fences would be 2 miles long. It's a 1/4 mile wide. So that's a long, skinny paddock. And as Burke says, then you put your polywires wherever you want. You can give them 5 acres, 10 acres, 23 acres, whatever it needs to be with each break. And then in that design, we would have a pipeline on alternate fences. So there's going to be 2 pipelines running down there that have our watering points. And in a design like that, we would typically have 4 permanent tanks, so that each half section has 1 tank serving it, a corridor on each side, and then we'll put hydrants or quick coupler valves intermediate through there so that we can use a movable tank through that system. Now, I used to think that movable tanks, that's something you do if you got 40 cows or maybe up to 100 cows. We have clients who are running 800 cow herds to movable tanks now. You design enough recharge capacity into those pipelines. Non-stressed adult bovines drink at a rate of about 2 gallons a minute. And so that's how we figure the water flow capacity, the tank size that we need, how many animals are going to be there drinking. If you know those things and design the system, it's amazing what you can do, even with large herds of cattle with movable tanks. We got a question in the back here.
Do you ever run any of your pipelines above ground?
Do we run any of our pipelines above ground? Yes, we do. In a lot of places, we run over the surface. If it is going to be primarily, you know, I'm going to say a May through November grazing deal, you can certainly live with over-the-surface pipelines in cold climates. If you're grazing in the winter, if we have, and yesterday I talked about spring water supply. If you have a flowing spring and you have live water that you can run over-the-surface pipelines in the winter as well. But definitely in the growing season, we use a lot of over-the-surface line.
We do the same thing. On some of our farms, we have 1 water tank for the whole farm, and that tank is moved. We move our cattle twice a day, and so we'll move that tank each time we move the cattle. We're watering right now on a 60-gallon tank. We've got about 350 head in there, and they're being moved every day. What we found out, if you don't make a cow walk very far, it's not a group effort when they come to that tank. You're going to have 5 or 6 coming to drink, maybe 5 or 6 drinking and 5 or 6 walking back. If they've got to walk, let's say here to that hill over there, you're going to have probably 25, 30, 40 of them going, maybe the whole herd. Now you're going to have a bigger tank, they're going to run out of water. When animals can hear water running into a tank, they freak out. They feel like they're never going to get a drink. And so when we move the cattle, we always set the tank up ahead of the cattle. It's already full when they go in. So when the cattle go in, they don't hear running water. If they hear running water, they're not going to like that. But we use above ground piping and we love it. I mean, you can take a lifetime guaranteed water hose. We buy the good ones. We'll get a 100-footer, maybe 50-footer, whatever. But when you plug that into a quick coupler right in your high tensile fence line, above ground water line, guys, a quick coupler only costs you $14.95. A hydrant is $130 for a good one. You can put those couplers underneath your high tensile wire where the cows can't mess with it. That's where your line's at. And the grass that grows up in that fence actually helps shade that black pipe. If you're using black polyethylene, helps keep your water cooler. And you can move that tank around so much so we don't ever put our water tank in the same spot. We'll run it out this way, and that's where we design our paddocks. Next time we can put it over there so we don't have a beat up area where the cattle are there. Every time they come through there, you get a bare spot. And so you're moving your fertility around. Remember, your water is a magnet. It's bringing manure to it. It's bringing livestock to it. Manure and pee. The same way with your mineral. I'll go into farms and people have their mineral right here by the water. Well, it's a magnet too. It should be on the opposite corner from your water. Make those cattle walk so you're getting that animal impact across your whole paddock. You don't want it all right up here by your tank. So it's a magnet. It ought to be on the opposite corner so that cattle can walk over there. They're going to be pooping and peeing going to that mineral.
I think one more question would be, and then
Was that Josh back there?
Yeah. I guess the two-part question, this would be for our speakers and for Lance. Yesterday we talked about calves having access to good water at a fairly young age. Was that a consideration in some of this? And then to convert this or add to it for winter grazing, you know, a water setup, what are some setups that you've seen that have worked well from a winter grazing standpoint and or a calf watering standpoint when calves are still fairly small?
I've just seen people set the tank, the primary tank, low enough that the calf can get in at a fairly young age. It can get its head to it. Now sometimes cows will want to jump in that tank, and if they do, you just put electric fence around it. It takes about 3 steel posts on various locations, and you electrify that, and the cow sticks her foot in that water, and it sticks her nose on that electric fence, and she's not going to want to do it again. So there's some little tricks that way, but I've always made the same tank work for both cows and calves, but you have to set the tank low enough that can happen.
When you use a smaller water tank, that's always something you've got to watch. We use fiberglass posts. We'll drive 4 posts, 1 on each side of that tank, so the cows can't flip it. Okay. The other thing is we do is you run a poly wire right across the center of that tank. If you don't, you're going to have something standing in it. You know, on a hot day, they'll climb in there, and what do? They break off your valve. Well, now you got a big mess, and there's water going everywhere. We had a bull. We used to run our pigs with the cattle, and I had a boar. He loved using our water tank as a bathtub, and he'd be in there just swimming around like, "How's it going, Greg?" I'm like, "You dog!" And he broke off my water valve in a drought. I came out to that night, and I had a 2-inch valve on that tank. It looked like a river going down through, and that hog swimming around my tank, looking at me. So I kicked him out, and he jumped out of the tank and was looking at me, and I put a poly wire right across the top of it, hooked it onto my fence. He looked at me, and he climbed back in that tank. He said, "I think I'm going to have me a poly wire sandwich." He reached up and grabbed that wire with his teeth. And I mean, he let out a squeal, and he exploded. I saw a flying hog. That's the last time I ever went in that tank.
Pigs do fly.
Pigs can fly.
You know, on those lower tanks, You can do the electric fence. You can guardrail down. To me, going ahead and, putting a rail around it is just one more piece of putting it in right from the start. Build it in there. That'll keep them out. Something that our son Ian has done is, rather than having a guardrail on every tank, he made a grid that you sat on top. And yeah, it was a bit heavy to move around, but they had put in all the same size tire tanks, and so as the herd moved from one pasture to the next, they would move the grid and set on that next tank, and that's what kept the stock from getting in. But if you live in hot country, cattle will want to get in tanks sometimes, and you got to do something to stop that. On the ranch in Idaho, we do not do anything to our tanks, and very, 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 very rarely have we ever had cattle get in a tank, and it's because it never gets hot there, and it's always ice water in the tank.